I woke up in a VIP hospital room after suddenly collapsing at my 71st birthday party. My head was still spinning when I heard whispers through the half-open door. "Are you sure it worked?" my daughter-in-law asked in a trembling voice. My son let out a quiet laugh. "Relax. By tomorrow morning, the $45 million will be ours." My heart nearly stopped. I lay perfectly still, pretending I was still unconscious. Then I slowly reached for my phone and sent my attorney a 3-word message: "Start it now. If you found your way here today, thank you. That means something to me. Now do me a favor, leave a comment below and tell me where you're joining from. City, state, country, wherever you are, I want to see it. You'd be surprised how far these stories travel." Note: certain elements here are fictional, crafted for narrative and educational value. Names and locations are coincidental. The lesson behind them, however, is very real. I never thought the night of my 70th birthday would be the closest I ever came to dying. The Post Oak Hotel ballroom on the 42nd floor was everything my son Derek had promised. Ivory tablecloths, crystal chandeliers throwing soft gold light across the room, arrangements of white gardenias on every table, Margaret's favorite flower, a detail that caught me off guard when I first walked in. 70 candles on a 3-tiered cake that probably cost more than my first car. Around 40 guests filled the space, business partners I'd known for decades. A few old friends from the early Houston days, senior staff from Caldwell Footwear Group, who had been with me since before Derek was old enough to tie his own shoes. It looked perfect. That was the first thing that bothered me. "Dad, you need a drink." Derek appeared at my elbow, pressing a glass of sparkling water into my hand. He was wearing a charcoal suit I hadn't seen before, his dark hair combed back, his smile wide and easy. "Big night. 70 years. That's something to celebrate." "It's something all right," I said, clinking my glass against his. He laughed. The laugh was warm, natural, the laugh of a man without a single thing on his conscience. I had heard that laugh 1,000 times over 42 years, and standing there in the middle of that beautiful room, I realized I no longer knew if it was real. Natalie found me 20 minutes later near the windows overlooking downtown Houston. The city was laid out below us like a circuit board, all light and motion, indifferent to everything happening on the 42nd floor. She looked stunning in a deep burgundy dress, her dark hair pinned up, pearl earrings catching the light. She was carrying 2 champagne flutes. "Raymond." She smiled and held one out toward me. "This one's special. Derek picked it out himself. Said you'd love it." Her fingers were steady. Her voice was smooth. But her eyes moved to Derek across the room for just a fraction of a second before coming back to me. "Special how?" I asked. "Vintage Reserve. Something French. I don't remember the name." She laughed lightly, a practiced laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Derek knows more about wine than I do. All I know is it costs a fortune." I took the glass, held it, felt the cool crystal against my palm. "Thank you, Natalie," I said. She nodded, lifted her own glass, and walked away toward a group of guests near the far wall. Across the room, Derek was watching. When our eyes met, he raised his glass and smiled. I looked down at the champagne. The bubbles rose slowly, tiny columns climbing toward the surface before vanishing. The light from the chandeliers bent through the glass and scattered gold across my fingers. 40 years ago, I had celebrated the opening of my first Caldwell store with a $12 bottle of sparkling wine from a gas station 2 blocks away. Margaret had laughed until she cried. We'd sat on overturned crates in that empty little shop on Westheimer Road and toasted to the future with paper cups. I thought about that night now, standing in this ballroom with crystal in my hand and 40 guests in expensive clothes, and I wondered how I had traveled so far from that gas station's sparkling wine and how my son had ended up somewhere I didn't recognize. "Opa." A small hand grabbed my sleeve. I looked down. Lily was standing beside me in a white dress, chocolate icing, already smeared at the corner of her mouth, her dark eyes wide and bright. She was 10 years old, and she had my wife's smile, the same smile that had kept me going through every hard year since Margaret passed. "You haven't had any cake yet," she announced with the full moral authority of a 10-year-old. "Miss Carroll says it's rude not to eat your own birthday cake." "Is that what Miss Carroll says?" She said it very seriously. Lily crossed her arms. "So you have to." I crouched down to her level and pointed at the smear on her chin. "Looks like somebody already started without me." Her eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her face. Then she burst into giggles and buried her head against my shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, the room fell away, and there was only the smell of sugar and a child laughing, and the memory of every birthday that had ever mattered. "I love you, little bug," I said quietly. "I love you too, Opa." She pulled back, still grinning. "Now go eat your cake." I straightened up and raised my champagne glass toward the candles on the cake across the room. Then I brought it to my lips and took a single small sip. The champagne was cold, dry. Excellent, actually. I set the glass down on the nearest table. 20 minutes later, the edges of the room began to blur. It started as something I might have mistaken for tiredness. A warmth behind my eyes. A slight softness at the edges of my vision. The way a room looks when you've been on your feet too long. I blinked. The chandelier above me split into two for a moment, then reconnected. My chest felt strange. Not painful strange. Like something had shifted slightly out of place. I reached for the back of the nearest chair and gripped it. "Raymond!" A voice from somewhere to my left. One of my partners, I thought, but the voice already sounded underwater. The floor tilted. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a quiet, terrifying degree of tilt, the kind that tells your body, before your mind catches up, that something is very wrong. I heard Lily's voice cut through the noise of the room, sharp and high and frightened. "Opa!" That was the last thing I heard before the lights went out. The last thought I had before the darkness took me was a strange one. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was the image of that $12 bottle of sparkling wine. The paper cups. Margaret laughing. And the quiet, certain knowledge that whatever was happening to me right now, someone in this room had planned it. The first thing I was aware of was the smell. Antiseptic. That sharp, clean, slightly chemical scent that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, except hospitals, and the particular kind of dread that goes with them. Then the sound, a monitor beeping somewhere to my right, steady and indifferent, measuring out my heartbeat, like a metronome that had no idea what had just happened to the man it was attached to. I opened my eyes slowly. The ceiling above me was white, institutional white. Not the warm ivory of the post-oak ballroom. This was the flat, functional white of a place designed for recovery, not celebration. I was in a hospital room, a private one from the look of it. Leather armchair in the corner, a window showing the distant glow of the Houston skyline, the kind of room that costs $1,200 a night and that insurance companies argue about paying for. Houston Methodist. I recognized the particular quality of the silence. I had sat in this same building 8 years ago when they told me Margaret wasn't going to make it. My mouth was dry. My arms felt heavy. The back of my left hand had an IV needle taped to it, and there was a blood pressure cuff on my right arm that tightened automatically every few minutes, like something politely reminding me I was still alive. I turned my head carefully. The door to the room was pulled almost shut, but not quite. Through the narrow gap, I could see a slice of the hallway outside. Fluorescent light. The distant sound of rubber-soled shoes somewhere far down the corridor. And then voices. Close. Just outside the door. Barely above a whisper, but perfectly audible in the deep quiet of the hospital floor. "The thing they gave him." Natalie's voice. Low, tightly controlled, but with something running underneath it that I recognized as fear. "Are you absolutely sure it worked the way it was supposed to?" A pause. Then Derek. Relax. His voice was easy, comfortable. The voice of a man who had thought this through many times and found no problems with his thinking. By tomorrow morning, $45 million is going to be ours. My chest went very still. Not my heartbeat that kept going. The monitor confirmed it, steady as ever. But something deeper in me went absolutely, completely still. The kind of stillness that happens when something you feared but refused to believe has just been spoken out loud in plain English, and there is no more room for doubt. 45 years. That was how long I had been building Caldwell Footwear Group. I started with one storefront on Westheimer Road, a used cash register, and 32 pairs of boots I'd bought at auction from a bankrupt distributor. My hands had touched every invoice, every lease agreement, every hiring decision in those early years. Margaret had kept the books on a legal pad at the kitchen table. We had worked every holiday for the first 3 years because we couldn't afford to close. And now my son was standing outside my hospital room at whatever hour of the night. This was calmly dividing up the proceeds. I lay completely still and kept my breathing slow and even. 40 years of running a business had taught me the single most valuable skill in any negotiation, knowing when to say nothing at all. "You said the same thing last month," Natalie said, and I could hear the strain behind the words now. "And the month before." "Last month was preparation," Derek said. "Tonight was execution. There's a difference." "Derek." Her voice dropped even lower. "If something goes wrong, if they find something in his blood work, it won't show," he said flatly. Harmon was very specific about that. "It metabolizes fast. By the time they run a full panel, there won't be anything to find." "Harmon." I filed the name away without moving a muscle. "You're sure?" Natalie said again. "I'm sure." A pause. Then lighter, almost amused. "Go get some coffee, you look terrible." I heard footsteps, Natalie's heels on the linoleum moving away down the corridor. Then silence for a moment. Then Derek's footsteps, slower, coming toward the door. My eyes closed. I heard the door push open softly. I felt rather than saw him standing in the doorway looking at me. I kept my breathing deep and steady, the breathing of a man unconscious, the breathing of a father who had not heard a single word just spoken outside his room. Derek stood there for what felt like a full minute, maybe less. Then the door eased shut again, and his footsteps receded down the hall. I opened my eyes. The nurse had placed my cell phone on the nightstand. When they'd brought me in, I'd noticed it when I first woke up. A small mercy, or maybe just standard procedure. Either way, it was there. I reached for it with my right hand, moving slowly, keeping the motion small. The screen lit up when I touched it. 41 missed calls, a wall of notifications. I didn't look at any of them. I opened my messages and found the thread with Martin Ellsworth, my attorney, my strategist, the man who had spent the last 8 months building something alongside me that Derek didn't know existed and couldn't touch. I typed 3 words. "Start it now." I hit send. Placed the phone face down on the mattress beside me. Stared up at the ceiling. The monitor beeped. The blood pressure cuff tightened, measured, released. Outside the window, Houston glittered and hummed, vast and indifferent 20 floors below. 11 seconds later, the phone vibrated once. I turned it over. 1 message from Martin. 2 words. "Already running." My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. Not from grief, exactly, something older and quieter than grief. The particular ache of a man who prepared for the worst and hoped he was wrong and turned out to be right. I had spent 8 months building a cage. Tonight, Derek had walked into it and pulled the door shut behind himself without knowing it. I set the phone back down, closed my eyes for real this time, and let out a long, slow breath through my nose. Tomorrow was going to be the first day of something that had been a long time coming. But that story, the one about how all of this began, about the questions that started 8 months ago, about the man I had called in a coffee shop before the sun was fully up that story starts somewhere else entirely. It starts on a Tuesday morning in March, in my office on the 12th floor, when my son sat down across from me with a cup of coffee and a very specific question about my will. To understand why Martin was ready and waiting the night, I sent that message from my hospital bed. I have to take you back 8 months. Back to a Tuesday morning in March when the Texas sun was already climbing hard through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 12th floor, and my son walked in with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that I now understand was the beginning of everything. "Morning, Dad." Derek set one of the cups on the edge of my desk and dropped into the leather chair across from me with the ease of a man completely at home. He had grown up around this office. He knew every inch of it. "Morning." I kept my eyes on the quarterly report in front of me. "You're in early. Couldn't sleep." He shrugged, sipped his coffee. "Listen, I've been thinking. You've got a lot going on with the estate, the house, the company shares, everything Margaret left behind. Have you ever thought about updating your will? Tax laws change, you know. It's worth a review." I looked up slowly. "Who told you my will needs reviewing?" He laughed short and satisfied, the sound of a man who had already counted the money. "Nobody. I was reading an article. Estate planning mistakes people over 65 make. You came to mind." "That's thoughtful of you," I said. "I'm your son. That's my job." I smiled at him. He smiled back. And I wrote nothing down that morning because it seemed like exactly what he said. It was a son reading an article thinking of his father. Nothing more. But the following Tuesday, Derek was back. "Dad, quick question." He leaned against the doorframe casual, as anything like the thought had just occurred to him on his way past. "Your trust structure, did you ever set one up? Because with $45 million in assets, if something happened to you, probate in Texas could drag on for years. Natalie's cousin went through it. Nightmare." My pen stopped moving on the page. "I have advisors who handle that," I said carefully. Right. Of course." He nodded and was gone. The week after that, it was voting rights. He brought it up over lunch in the downstairs conference room between bites of a sandwich, as though the question had floated up from nowhere. "Dad, who controls the voting shares on the company, if you're ever, I don't know, incapacitated somehow, like if you had a stroke or something?" My jaw tightened so slightly that no one in the world would have noticed. "That's an oddly specific question, Derek." He held up both hands, laughing a little. "Come on, I'm the CEO. It's a legitimate governance question. I'd ask any board member the same thing." "Would you?" "Of course." He bit into his sandwich. "Just thinking ahead. That's what good executives do." That night, I went home to River Oaks, sat down at my desk in the study, and pulled out a brown leather notebook from the locked bottom drawer. Margaret had given it to me 20 years ago for our anniversary. I had never used it for anything. It had felt too good for ordinary notes. I opened it to the first page and started writing. Date. Time. The question. Word for word, as close as I could remember it. 3 weeks later, I had 11 entries. Will review. Trust structure. Voting shares. Life insurance beneficiary designation. Board governance in event of incapacitation. Probate timeline. Asset liquidity. Whether the company would be required to go to auction if the primary shareholder died intestate. The value of the real estate holdings. The specifics of my personal investment accounts. Whether I had ever considered a buy-sell agreement. 11 questions. 3 weeks. From a man who had never shown the slightest interest in the financial architecture of Caldwell Footwear Group in 42 years of living. I sat with that notebook in my lap for a long time that evening, the study quiet around me, the Houston night, pressing softly against the windows. My chest felt hollow in a way I hadn't felt since the morning they told me Margaret's prognosis. I pressed one hand flat against the desk to steady myself because my fingers had started to tremble in a way that had nothing to do with age. I thought about the little boy who used to sit on the floor of that first Westheimer Road store and sort shoeboxes by size while I worked the register. I thought about driving him to Little League on Saturday mornings. I thought about the day I handed him the CEO title and watched his face go wide with something I had read as pride. Had any of it been real? I closed the notebook, pressed both palms flat against the cover, took one long breath. Then I picked up my cell phone and scrolled to a contact I had saved 3 months earlier but never called. The name read simply F. Donahue. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering. Then I put the phone back down. Not because I had decided against it, because I needed one more week to be sure I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. That week, Derek knocked on my office door and asked very gently, very warmly, whether I had ever considered what would happen to the company if a court ever found me to be. And he paused here, his voice going soft, with what sounded like genuine concern, cognitively diminished. I thanked him for his thoughtfulness. That evening I called F. Donahue. Frank Donahue didn't pick up that first night. He called me back the following morning at 6:47, while I was standing in my kitchen in River Oaks waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, still in my bathrobe, staring out at the backyard, where the live oak trees were just starting to catch the early light. "Mr. Caldwell." His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been awake for a while already. "You called last night." "I did," I said. "You want to meet." It wasn't a question. I appreciated that. "Yes," I said, "somewhere quiet, not downtown." A brief pause. "You know the Brenham Street Diner on the west side off Washington Avenue? I can find it. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., come alone." He hung up before I could say anything else. No pleasantries, no explanation, no assurance that everything would be fine. I stood there with the phone in my hand and the coffee maker gurgling behind me, and I felt strangely better than I had in 3 weeks. The Brenham Street Diner was exactly the kind of place nobody who knew Raymond Caldwell would ever expect to find him. Cracked vinyl booths, a laminated menu with photographs of the food, a handwritten sign above the counter that read, "We accept cash only, God bless." The woman working the register had been there long enough that she didn't look up when the door opened. Frank Donahue was already seated when I arrived at 6:55. Corner booth. Back to the wall sightlines to both the front door and the kitchen hallway. He was somewhere around 50 broad through the shoulders, with the kind of forgettable face that was almost certainly deliberate, the sort of man you'd pass on the street twice and not remember either time. He was drinking black coffee and reading a folded newspaper like he had nowhere else to be in the world. He didn't stand when I approached. He just looked up and nodded once at the seat across from him. I sat down. The waitress appeared. I ordered coffee. She left. Frank folded the newspaper and set it aside. He studied me for a moment with calm, pale gray eyes, the eyes of a man who spent a career reading people and had long since stopped being surprised by what he found. "Former FBI," I said. "That's what I was told. 14 years. White-collar crime, mostly." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Now I work for myself, which means I choose my clients. And you're choosing to meet with me. I'm deciding whether to." His voice was matter-of-fact, no edge in it. "Tell me what's going on." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed the brown leather notebook on the table between us. Pushed it across, slowly. Frank looked at it but didn't touch it yet. "What's this?" 11 questions, I said. "Asked by my son over 3 weeks. All of them about my estate, my assets. What happens when I die?" My voice stayed even. I had practiced keeping it even. I started writing them down because I couldn't sleep. Frank picked up the notebook, opened it, turned the pages slowly, reading each entry. His expression didn't change, not even slightly. That was the moment I decided I'd found the right man. "He's the CEO of your company," Frank said, still reading. "I put him there 5 years ago, and before that, Before that, he was my son. My jaw tightened. I thought those were the same thing. Frank closed the notebook, set it down, picked up his coffee and took a slow drink, looking at me over the rim of the mug. Then he set it down and leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to ask you something before we go any further." His voice was even clinical almost. "Do you want me to find out what's actually happening? Or do you want me to tell you there's a reasonable explanation for all of this so you can go back to your life?" My eyes burned unexpectedly, not tears exactly, but that sharp, awful pressure behind the eyes that comes right before them. I blinked it back hard, pressed my fingers flat against the table. "I'm 70 years old next November," I said. "I don't have time left for comfortable lies." Something shifted in Frank's expression, barely perceptible, but there. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "All right," he said. He reached into his jacket and produced a small white card, plain with nothing on it but a phone number. He slid it across the table. "This is the only number you call, not my public line. This one. You don't text it, you call. If I don't answer, I'll call back within the hour." I picked up the card. "What happens now? Now you go home. Go to work. Act exactly the way you always act around your son." He paused, his gray eyes steady on mine. "Can you do that?" My throat ached in a way that had nothing to do with illness. The idea of sitting across from Derek at the next board meeting, of shaking his hand, of smiling at him over the conference room table while this thing sat between us like a loaded gun. The thought of it made me want to press both hands over my chest to keep something from cracking. But I nodded. "Yes. Good." Frank picked up the brown notebook and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I'll need to hold on to this." "Take it." He nodded. "Give me 4 weeks." He left first, dropping a $10 bill on the table without being asked. I sat there for another 10 minutes with my coffee, watching the diner fill up around me, ordinary people starting their ordinary Tuesday. And I tried to remember the last time I had felt ordinary myself. I couldn't find it. 4 weeks later, Frank Donahue called me. But his voice that morning told me immediately whatever he had found, it was not going to be small. 4 weeks to the day after I handed Frank my brown notebook at that diner on Washington Avenue. Martin Ellsworth called me at 8 in the morning and said 4 words. Frank had already briefed him. "Come in, bring nothing." Martin's office occupied the entire east side of the 18th floor of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower in downtown Houston. Floor-to-ceiling windows, dark walnut bookshelves lining every wall, a conference table that had witnessed more difficult conversations than most courtrooms. I had sat across that table from Martin for 20 years, through the acquisition of our third distribution center, through Margaret's estate, through every significant legal moment Caldwell Footwear had ever faced. Walking in that afternoon, I felt the weight of what was about to happen, pressing down on my shoulders before a single word had been spoken. Frank was already there when I arrived, seated at the far end of the table. A black manila folder sat in front of him, closed. Martin stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the Houston skyline with the expression of a man steeling himself. "Raymond." Martin turned and pulled out the chair beside him. "Sit down." I sat. Frank looked across the table at me with those pale gray eyes that never gave anything away. "Before I open this," he said, "I need to ask you the same question I asked at the diner, because what's in here is going to change things. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it." My hands were perfectly steady on the table. My heart was hammering so hard I was half convinced both of them could hear it. "Open it," I said. Frank opened the folder. The first pages were photographs. Frank walked me through each one without rushing, his voice calm and factual, like a man reading a weather report. Derek and a woman entering the Marriott on Greenway Plaza on a Tuesday evening in April. Derek and the same woman leaving 3 hours later. A restaurant in the Heights. A corner table, candlelight, hands touching across a white tablecloth. A weekend in San Antonio hotel records dinner receipts a Saturday afternoon at the Riverwalk. I looked at every photograph. My chest felt like something had reached inside and squeezed hard, then let go, then squeezed again. The woman in the photographs was not Natalie. How long? My voice came out steadier than I deserved. At least 14 months, Frank said. Possibly longer. That's as far back as the paper trail goes. 14 months. I pressed my molars together until my jaw ached. 14 months of Derek sitting at my dinner table. 14 months of holidays and board meetings and Sunday phone calls. 14 months of my son looking me in the eye and performing the role of a devoted family man while this was happening on the side. My eyes burned something fierce. I blinked hard twice and kept my face level. There's more, Frank said. He didn't say it gently. He said it the way surgeons deliver information, clean and direct, because softening it doesn't help anyone. He slid a new set of documents across the table. Not photographs this time. Bank records, spreadsheets, transaction histories printed in small, dense columns. What am I looking at? I asked, even though something in my gut already knew. Martin leaned forward. Over the past 18 months, approximately $3.1 million has been moved out of Caldwell Footwear Group through a series of fraudulent transactions. The number hit me like a physical blow. My hand moved involuntarily to the edge of the table and gripped it. 3.1 million, I repeated. Consulting fees paid to vendors that don't exist, Frank said, tapping one page. Investment transfers to what appears to be a legitimate fund, but is actually a shell company that's a business entity set up purely on paper with no real operations used to move money while hiding who it ultimately goes to. In this case, the shell company is registered in Delaware, and the beneficial owner is Natalie Caldwell. Natalie. The name came out flat. Her name is on the registration documents, Frank said. Whether she participated willingly or Derek used her without full disclosure, I can't tell you that yet. Martin interlocked his fingers on the table. Raymond, I need you to understand what this means legally. If Derek dies or if you die and this money is never recovered, it simply disappears into that shell company. The people who benefit from your estate, whether that's Derek or anyone else named in your current, will inherit a company that has been quietly bled for a year and a half. My throat tightened so hard it was difficult to swallow. I thought about the first pair of boots I ever sold. A rancher from Katy, Texas, who came in off the street and spent $62 and shook my hand on his way out. I thought about every lease I'd signed, every employee I'd hired, every Christmas bonus I'd scraped together in the lean years because those people had families and they'd shown up every day. $3.1 million. Gone. Can it be proven? I asked. My voice had gone very quiet. With the right forensic accountant and enough time, yes, Martin said. But Raymond... He paused, and I could see something shifting behind his eyes, a hesitation that I had almost never seen from him in 20 years. There's something Frank and I need to say to you directly. Then say it. Frank leaned forward slightly. The financial theft is serious. But the pattern of behavior, the questions about your estate, the questions about incapacitation, the movement of money, the cover structures, this doesn't look like a man planning to wait for a natural inheritance. The room seemed to contract slightly around me. What does it look like? I asked, even though every nerve in my body was screaming the answer at me. Martin met my eyes without flinching. It looks like someone preparing for a major transfer of wealth on a specific timeline, one that he controls. 3 heartbeats passed. I want to protect everything, I said. Every asset, every account, everything my wife and I built. I want it protected before Derek can touch it. Martin reached across the table and put one hand briefly on my forearm, a gesture so uncharacteristic of him that it told me more than anything else how serious this was. That's exactly what we're going to do. Frank closed the black folder. There's one more thing. I looked at him. The questions Derek has been asking you, the ones about cognitive decline, incapacitation, board governance. His gray eyes held steady. I think you need to be prepared for the possibility that the plan doesn't end with waiting for you to die naturally. The air in the room felt different after he said that. Thinner somehow. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees without anyone touching the thermostat. I sat with that sentence for a long moment. Then I nodded once, slowly. Then we'd better move fast, I said. July in Houston is its own particular punishment. By the time the calendar flipped to the second week of the month, the temperature outside the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower was holding steady at 104 degrees, and the air coming off the pavement on Smith Street hit you like opening an oven door. But those Wednesday afternoons in Martin's office, just the two of us, no assistants, no paralegals, the door locked and the blinds drawn, were colder than any air conditioning could explain. We were building something, and the thing we were building was designed to survive whatever my son had planned. Let me explain what we're doing and why, Martin said at our first session, spreading a series of documents across the conference table in neat columns. He was meticulous in a way that had always made me trust him, every paper in its place, every term defined before he used it. We're going to work in layers. Each layer protects something specific. Taken together, they make your estate essentially untouchable without your explicit consent. How long will this take? I asked. 4 to 6 weeks if we move efficiently. He adjusted his reading glasses. Longer if you have questions about every line. I'll have questions about every line, I said. Martin allowed himself the faintest trace of a smile. I expected that. The first layer was the irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, Martin explained. Pulling the relevant documents forward means that once your assets go into it, they cannot be taken back out by you or claimed by anyone else without the conditions you specify being met. It's not like a regular will which can be contested in probate court. A properly structured, irrevocable trust in Texas is one of the most airtight asset protection tools in American estate law, and Derek can't touch it, not unless you name him as a beneficiary with specific conditions attached. Martin met my eyes, which you will not be doing. My chest tightened at that. Not because I doubted the decision, I had stopped doubting it somewhere in the middle of staring at those photographs in Frank's black folder. It tightened because saying it out loud to another human being made it permanent in a way that writing it in a notebook alone in my study at midnight had not. Who are the beneficiaries? I asked, keeping my voice level. That's your decision. But I have some suggestions based on what you've told me about Lily, about your long-term employees, about Margaret's wishes. He paused. We have time to work through that properly. The second layer was the dual-class share structure. Right now, Martin said, sliding a corporate governance document toward me. Derek controls day-to-day operations as CEO, but the voting shares the shares that actually decide the direction of the company. Who sits on the board, whether the company can be sold, those are still in your name. What I'm proposing is a restructure that locks those voting rights in a separate class of shares that cannot be transferred, sold, or reassigned without a supermajority board vote. In practice, it means Derek cannot use his position as CEO to override you on anything that matters. And if he tries to get the board to vote against me, the structure requires a 75% supermajority to make any change to the voting class. Martin tapped the page. I've looked at your current board composition. He doesn't have 75%. He doesn't come close. Something shifted slightly in my chest, not relief exactly, but the first faint loosening of a knot that had been pulled tight for 4 months. What else? I asked. Life insurance beneficiary designations. Martin pulled another stack of documents forward. Your current policy lists Derek as primary beneficiary. We're changing that today. To who? To the trust. Which means the money goes where you decide it goes, not automatically to whoever is named on a 20-year-old form that Derek knows about and has been counting on. I picked up the pen. Signed. Moved to the next page. Signed again. Page after page after page, each one quietly dismantling something that Derek had spent months surveying and believing was his. There was a particular satisfaction in it that I am not ashamed to admit. We worked through 3 Wednesday afternoons in July. Each session lasted 3 hours. Each session ended with Martin stacking the completed documents into a locked fireproof cabinet behind his desk. No copies sent to my house, no digital files on any server connected to Caldwell Footwear's network. Everything existed only here in this room, in that cabinet. On the last Wednesday of the month, Martin slid the final document across the table. A new will, completely rewritten. Every asset, every account, every decision about the fate of Caldwell Footwear Group restructured from the ground up. I picked it up and read it from the first line to the last. It took 12 minutes. Martin refilled my coffee twice without being asked. When I set it down, I looked across the table at him and asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my throat all month. Martin, if I'm wrong about Derek, if Frank's wrong, if all of this is some terrible misreading of an over-curious son, can all of this be undone? Martin took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. He looked at me directly, the way a man looks at you when he's choosing honesty over comfort. The trust can be modified with your authorization while you're alive and legally competent, he said. The will can be rewritten as many times as you choose. The share structure can be reversed with board approval. He paused. So yes, technically all of it can be undone. But I said because there was clearly a but. But I've been a lawyer for 38 years, Raymond, and I have never, not once, built a structure like this for a client who turned out not to need it. He picked up his glasses again. I don't think you're wrong. I nodded and signed the last page. Outside Martin's window, Houston baked under the July sun, indifferent and enormous. I drove home through traffic that evening thinking about the Westheimer Road store, about Margaret, about all the years I had spent trusting that hard work and love would be enough to hold a family together. I thought about Derek, and I wondered not for the first time exactly when my son had decided that $45 million was worth more than his father's life. August in Houston came in like a freight train that had forgotten how to slow down. The live oaks in my backyard at River Oaks were still green. They stay green year-round. One of the few things in this city that doesn't surrender to the heat. And on that particular Sunday afternoon, they threw long, dappled shadows across the grass that made the whole yard feel like a different world from the one I had been living in for the past 5 months. Lily had arrived Friday evening with a backpack, a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit, who had been missing one ear since she was 6 and enough energy to power the entire neighborhood. She was the daughter of my late wife, Margaret's niece, a connection that was technically second cousins or something equally difficult to diagram on paper. But what she was in practice was simple. She was the child who still ran to me when I opened the front door, the one who called me Opa, because she had decided at age 3 that great uncle was too many syllables for someone she loved that much. On Sunday afternoon, we were sitting together on the old wooden swing under the biggest live oak, the one Margaret had always called the grandfather tree. Lily was working her way through a chocolate ice cream cone with the focused dedication of a professional, her white sneakers swinging 2 inches above the grass, Biscuit tucked under her arm. I was watching the sunlight shift across the lawn and trying for one afternoon not to think about Derek. Opa, Lily said, not looking up from her ice cream. How come you never change your will? My whole body went perfectly still. For a split second, the yard, the oak tree, the warm August air, everything contracted to a single point. I turned my head toward her slowly. What did you just say, sweetheart? She licked a drip off the side of the cone and looked up at me with Margaret's eyes wide, dark, completely guileless. I heard Dad asking Mom about it in the kitchen yesterday. He said... She furrowed her brow, trying to remember the exact words, the way children do when they sense something is important, without understanding why. He said, how come the old man won't just sign the new one already? And Mom got a funny face and told him to keep his voice down. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. I kept my expression warm, kept my voice easy. What kind of funny face did Mom make? Lily considered this seriously. Like when she smells something bad, but doesn't want to be rude about it. She took another bite of ice cream. Opa, why does Dad want you to change your will? What's a will anyway? It's a document that says what happens to your things when you're gone, I said. She processed this. Like who gets biscuit if something happens to me? My heart cracked clean down the middle. Exactly like that, I said. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear the way I had done 1,000 times. And right now, Biscuit is very safe. She leaned her head against my arm, satisfied with that answer, and went back to her ice cream. I kept my hand resting gently on top of her head and stared out across the lawn, and underneath that stillness, I was doing the arithmetic that I hadn't wanted to do. Derek was losing patience. He had been asking me questions for 5 months. He had been bleeding the company for 18. He had a woman on the side, a shell company in Delaware, and now apparently he was in his kitchen, the day before coming to my house complaining to his wife about how long I was taking to die on his schedule. The old man won't just sign the new one already. My eyes burned hot. Not from sadness, from something colder and harder than sadness. The kind of feeling that doesn't make you want to cry. The kind that makes you want to act. Lily. I kept my voice gentle. Did your dad say anything else in the kitchen? Anything you remember? She thought about it, swinging her feet. He said something about a doctor. That a doctor was going to help make things go faster. She looked up at me. Is Dad trying to help you see a doctor, Opa? Are you sick? The bottom dropped out of my stomach. A doctor. Going to help make things go faster. No, sweetheart, I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice came out. I'm not sick. Your dad just worries about me sometimes. Oh. She seemed reassured. She held out the last bite of ice cream cone toward me. Want the end piece? It's the best part. I took it, chewed it, tasted nothing. You're right, I said. That's the best part. She beamed at me that smile that was so purely Margaret that it made my chest ache every single time, and hopped off the swing to go chase a squirrel across the lawn, Biscuit bouncing under her arm, completely unaware that she had just handed me the most important piece of information I had received in 5 months. I sat on that swing for a long time after she ran off. The grandfather tree moved slightly above me in the hot August air. A doctor, going to help make things go faster. I turned those words over and over in my mind, examining them from every angle, and every angle led to the same destination. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, and the house was quiet, I called Frank. I need you to look into something, I said when he picked up. Derek mentioned a doctor to Natalie, somebody who's supposed to help move things along. I paused. I don't know what that means yet, but I need to. There was a short pause on Frank's end. Then he said something that made every hair on my arms stand straight up. Raymond, don't go into work tomorrow morning. Meet me at your building, level B2, 7 a.m. Another pause. I already know about the doctor. Level B2 of the Caldwell Footwear Group building at 6:58 on a Monday morning was exactly as desolate as it sounds. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed and flickered in that particular way that makes every underground parking structure feel like the opening scene of something bad. A few cars belonging to overnight security sat in the far corners. The air smelled of concrete and motor oil, and the faint chemical sweetness of the cleaning products the maintenance crew used on weekends. My footsteps echoed off the low ceiling as I walked from the elevator toward the far support column where Frank had said to meet him. He was already there, leaning against the column, with his arms crossed, wearing a dark jacket, despite the August heat that was already pushing its way down even here underground. He had a manila envelope under one arm, thicker than anything he'd brought before. You look like you haven't slept, he said when I reached him. I haven't, I said. Tell me about the doctor. Frank straightened up and held the envelope out toward me. I took it. Inside were printed documents, emails, financial records, a background report with a photograph clipped to the front page. The photograph showed a man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of distinguished-looking face you'd trust immediately in a medical context. His name is Dr. Philip Harmon, Frank said. Board-certified neurologist. Private practice on Kirby Drive. 15 years in Houston, good reputation, no prior disciplinary actions. He tapped the photograph. 6 weeks ago, Derek contacted him. The emails are in there. I flipped to the email transcripts and started reading. My hands stayed steady. Everything else inside me did not. Derek had written to Dr. Harmon under the pretense of seeking a second opinion on his father's health. Over the course of 4 exchanges, the conversation had shifted subtly. At first, then, with increasing directness into something else entirely. Derek described symptoms he claimed to have observed in me. Forgetting names, repeating questions, losing track of time, difficulty, following complex conversations. Every single one of them fabricated. I knew it. Frank knew it. And based on the tone of Dr. Harmon's replies, Dr. Harmon had known it too and had not cared. He's going to file a guardianship petition, Frank said, watching my face as I read. In Texas, if a court accepts that someone is cognitively incapacitated, meaning they can no longer make sound legal or financial decisions, a guardian can be appointed to manage all of their affairs. That guardian would be Derek. I lowered the papers slowly. And what does a guardian have the power to do? Essentially everything you currently do for yourself, Frank said. His voice was flat and factual, but his gray eyes were watching me carefully. Control your bank accounts. Make decisions about your living arrangements. Override your existing legal documents if a court agrees they were signed under diminished capacity. He paused. In a worst-case scenario, place you in a memory care facility against your will on the grounds that you're a danger to yourself. The concrete floor under my feet felt like it was shifting. I pressed one hand flat against the support column beside me and breathed through my nose for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked back at Frank. He bribed this doctor, I said. It wasn't a question. $80,000, Frank said. Wired in 2 installments to a personal account Dr. Harmon holds separately from his practice. It's in the documents. $80,000. To have a physician look a Texas judge in the eye and testify that Raymond Caldwell, who had built a $45 million company from a cash register and 32 pairs of boots, no longer had the mental capacity to manage his own affairs. My throat closed up so tight I had to work to get air through it. Not from fear. From a specific bone-deep fury that I had never felt before in my 70 years on this earth. The kind of fury that comes not from being attacked, but from being underestimated. From someone who had watched you build everything, deciding that the easiest way to take it was to simply declare that you were no longer competent to own it. When? I asked. My voice came out scraped raw. When is he planning to file? Frank's expression didn't change. I believe he's waiting until after your birthday, he said. The party gives him a social occasion to document lots of witnesses who can testify to your condition if needed. After that, I would think the timeline moves fast. 3 weeks. The birthday was 3 weeks away. Does he know that you know? I asked. No, Frank said. And Dr. Harmon has no idea he's been investigated. As far as both of them are concerned, this is still on track. I nodded slowly. The fluorescent tube above us flickered once and steadied. Frank. I turned to look at him directly. What do I do with this? He met my eyes without hesitation. You take it to Martin today. You don't confront Derek. You don't change your behavior 1 degree. You go upstairs, you sit in your office, you have your Monday morning, and you act like a man who doesn't know any of this. He tilted his head slightly. Can you do that? The same question he had asked me in the diner 4 months ago. Can you do that? Last time I had answered yes and meant it intellectually. This time, I had to close my eyes for exactly 2 seconds, feel the full weight of what I was carrying. The photographs, the shell company, the stolen millions, the fake doctor, the birthday. That was apparently my son's chosen deadline, feel all of it, and then set it down somewhere deep enough that it wouldn't show on my face in the elevator ride up to the 12th floor. Yes, I said. Frank nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small USB drive. Copy of everything. Give it to Martin. The originals stay with me. He pressed it into my palm. Then he added quietly, Raymond, there's one more thing I need to say. I looked at him. The combination of the financial theft, the bribery of a medical professional, and the guardianship scheme. He held my gaze. This is not a man who is planning to simply wait for things to unfold naturally. I want you to be very careful between now and November about what you eat, what you drink. He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. About everything. The parking garage felt very quiet after that. I looked down at the USB drive in my palm. Then I closed my fingers around it, put it in my pocket, and walked back toward the elevator. Behind me, Frank's footsteps moved in the opposite direction. That evening, I drove to Martin's office and placed the USB drive on his conference table without saying a single word. He plugged it in, read for 11 minutes, and then looked up at me over the top of his reading glasses with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Raymond, he said, there's something I need you to do tonight when you get home. Something I should have suggested months ago. We're halfway through now, and I want to make sure you're still with me. Before I go any further, drop a 9 in the comments. That's all. Just the number 9. It tells me you're here, you're listening, and this story is reaching you. One thing worth mentioning, some elements in this story have been shaped for narrative and educational purposes. Details may be composite or adapted. If that's not your preference, this is a natural stopping point. Martin didn't tell me what to do in so many words. That wasn't his style. What he said, as I was standing up to leave his office that evening, with the USB drive back in my pocket, and the weight of everything Frank had shown me sitting across my shoulders like a physical thing, was this. Raymond, when Margaret passed, did she leave anything behind that you haven't read yet? I stopped moving. He kept his eyes on me, calm and steady behind his reading glasses. I'm asking because in 38 years of practice, I've found that the people who knew us longest sometimes see things the rest of us miss. And Margaret was one of the sharpest people I ever met. I drove home without the radio on. The house in River Oaks was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Lily had gone back to her parents that afternoon. The rooms were quiet in the way that large houses get quiet, when there's only one person in them, a silence that has weight and texture that presses against you from all sides. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon in the kitchen and carried it upstairs. Stood in the hallway outside the master bedroom for longer than I want to admit. Then I pushed the door open and walked to Margaret's side of the room. Her wardrobe was exactly as she had left it 8 years ago. I had moved some things, given her clothes to her nieces, donated her shoes, cleared out the everyday items. But the wardrobe itself I had never touched. It stood against the wall like a piece of the past that had agreed not to move as long as I didn't ask it to. I opened the left door. The smell that came out, faint, barely there after 8 years, but unmistakably hers, hit me so hard I had to grip the door handle with both hands to keep from staggering. Lavender and something warmer underneath it, something I had never been able to name in 42 years of marriage and had never stopped missing in the 8 years since. My eyes filled up so fast I couldn't blink it back. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and stood there for a moment, just breathing, just letting it pass through me the way grief does when you stop trying to manage it. On the shelf at the top of the wardrobe, behind a folded cashmere cardigan, the color of pale blue sky, was a cream-colored envelope. My name on the front in Margaret's handwriting, the handwriting I had watched fill notebooks and grocery lists and birthday cards for 4 decades. The handwriting I would know at the bottom of the ocean. I carried it to the edge of the bed and sat down. Held it in both hands for a moment. My fingers were trembling, not from age, not from the bourbon, from the particular terror of opening something that cannot be unopened. Then I pulled the flap and slid out 3 folded pages. The date at the top read April 14th, 2010. Derek had been 27 years old. Margaret had been 59, healthy, with no reason any of us knew of to be writing letters she didn't want read until necessary. Except Margaret had always known things before the rest of us caught up. I will try to give you the heart of what she wrote, without losing it entirely. She wrote about Derek. About watching him grow from the little boy who sorted shoe boxes on that Westheimer Road floor into a man she loved without reservation, but watched with a careful mother's eye that she had never quite been able to tolerance. She wrote, "I love our son Raymond, but I have watched him look at Caldwell's for years, and I have never once seen him look at it the way you do. You look at it like something you built with your own hands and your own heart. Derek looks at it like something he's waiting to receive." She wrote about a conversation she'd had with Derek the previous Christmas, when he had asked her very casually over dishes in the kitchen whether she thought Raymond would ever retire. And when she'd asked why he wanted to know, he had smiled and said, "Just planning ahead, Mom. People who love you don't plan around your absence," she wrote. "They plan for your presence." And then near the end of the second page, the paragraph that made my whole body go rigid. "If the day ever comes when Derek seems more interested in what Caldwell's is worth than in what it stands for, please don't give it to him, Raymond. Give it to the people who showed up every day. Give it to someone who understands that a business built on trust can only be passed to someone trustworthy. And if you can't find that person, build something that outlasts both of you." I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time after I finished reading. The bourbon glass was untouched on the nightstand. Outside the window, the River Oaks neighborhood was its usual nighttime quiet, distant traffic, a dog somewhere, the sound of sprinklers starting up on the lawn next door. My wife had known. She had seen it 15 years before I was willing to. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and held it against my chest for a moment, with both hands flat the way you hold something you're not sure you'll ever be able to put down again. Then I reached for my phone with one hand and called Martin. "She knew," I said when he answered. I didn't explain which she or what she knew. He understood immediately. "I thought she might have," he said quietly. "I want another layer, Martin." My voice had gone very steady in the way it goes steady when I've stopped feeling and started deciding. Not documents, something that catches them in the act, something no one can argue with in front of a judge. A pause on his end. Then, "I'll call Frank in the morning." I said goodnight, set the phone down, and placed the letter in the inside pocket of my jacket, the pocket closest to my chest. Then I lay back on the bed, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. Margaret had been right about everything. The least I could do was make sure she was right about this too. The call from Martin came at 7:15 the following morning, while I was still in the kitchen, still in the same clothes I'd worn the day before the bourbon glass from the night before, still untouched on the counter where I'd set it when I came downstairs. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. There is a particular kind of wakefulness that grief and resolve produce together, sharp and cold and very clear, like the air after a thunderstorm. "Frank has a proposal," Martin said without preamble. "Can you be at the building tonight late? After the last security shift change, which is at 10. "Tell me what he's proposing first," I said. "Cameras." Martin's voice was even. "In your office, the conference room, the areas where Derek conducts private meetings. Frank has the equipment and the technical expertise. The footage would feed to an external server, nothing connected to Caldwell's own network. Only you and Frank would have access. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. Is that legal? It's your building, Raymond. Your office. In Texas, you have the right to install surveillance equipment in spaces you own or control with no obligation to notify anyone. He paused. And Texas is a one-party consent state for recorded conversations, meaning as long as one party to a conversation has consented to the recording, it's admissible. Since the recording system is installed at your direction, you are that consenting party. Do it, I said. That night at 10:15, I let myself into the building through the side entrance on the parking level and took the stairs up to 12. Frank was already in the corridor outside my office with a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, quiet, carrying a soft case that looked like camera equipment, of the kind photographers use, nothing that would attract attention. My associate, Frank said simply by way of introduction. He doesn't need to know your name and you don't need to know his. He's done this kind of work for 15 years, and he's never made a mistake. I nodded at the man. He nodded back and got to work without a word. I stood in the corridor and kept watch while they moved through my office. Through the open door, I could see the two of them working with calm, methodical precision. Frank directing in quiet murmurs, his associate making adjustments to items on my bookshelves. The framed photographs on the credenza, a decorative object on the conference table that I had never particularly liked and now found myself deeply grateful for. 22 minutes. That was how long it took. Frank stepped out into the corridor and held up his phone, showing me a live feed, split into 3 angles: the desk area, the sitting area near the window, and the conference table. The image quality was remarkable, sharp enough to read the titles on my bookshelves. Audio, I asked. Directional microphones built into the same housings, Frank said. Pickup radius of approximately 15 feet. Clear enough to be used in a federal courtroom. He pocketed the phone. The feed records continuously to a cloud server. I'll review footage every 48 hours and flag anything significant. And if Derek finds them, Frank looked at me with those steady gray eyes. He won't, he said. Simply factually, the way a man says something, he has staked his professional reputation on. They were gone by 11. I stood alone in my office for a moment afterward, looking around at the space I had occupied for 30 years. Nothing looked different. Nothing looked changed. The cameras were perfectly invisible inside the objects that held them. I thought about all the conversations that had happened in this room over the decades. The hiring decisions, the expansions, the hard years when I'd sat at that desk at midnight trying to find a way to make payroll. And now one more layer of truth being gathered in these same walls. I turned off the light and went home. 2 weeks passed. I went to work every morning. I sat in meetings with Derek and watched him perform the role of attentive son and competent CEO with the same ease he always had. I complimented his quarterly projections. I asked about Natalie. I laughed at his jokes. Every single day was a performance, and I gave it everything I had, because the alternative was letting him know that the walls of his own office were listening. Then, on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of September, Frank called. "Check your email," he said. "I'm sending you a clip. Watch it before you come into the building today." I pulled over on Westheimer Road, 3 blocks from the spot where the original store had stood, and opened the file on my phone. The footage was from the conference room camera, time-stamped 2 days earlier at 6:41 in the evening, after the administrative staff had gone home. Derek was on the phone, standing at the window, with his back partially to the camera, his reflection visible in the dark glass. His voice was relaxed, almost cheerful. "No, it's moving exactly the way I planned," he was saying into the phone. "The old man is slipping faster than I expected. By the time we file Harmon's assessment, we'll be airtight." A short pause, listening. Then a laugh, light, easy, the laugh I had known since he was in diapers. "Don't worry about the timeline. Just make sure everything on your end is ready." Another pause. Then in a tone so casual it turned my stomach completely over. Once he signs one more time, we won't need him to sign anything ever again. The clip ended. I sat in my car on Westheimer Road, with the phone in my hand, and the engine running, and I stared through the windshield at the dry cleaners that now occupied the corner where Caldwell's first store had stood 40 years ago. Once he signs one more time, we won't need him to sign anything ever again. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My jaw was clenched so tight, I felt the ache all the way up into my eye sockets. The fury that moved through me in that moment was unlike anything I had felt before. Not hot, not explosive, but cold and absolute and perfectly focused. The kind of feeling that doesn't want to scream or strike out. The kind that waits. I loosened my grip on the wheel finger by finger. Took one breath, then another. Then I called Frank. "I got it," I said. "I know," he said. "There's more in the full footage. But Raymond, that clip is enough on its own. Combined with what we already have, we are building something that no defense attorney in Texas is going to be able to walk a jury away from." I pulled back onto Westheimer Road and drove toward the building. "Keep the cameras running," I said. "They never stopped," Frank said. Frank sent the second file at 9:47 that same evening. I was sitting in the study at River Oaks, still in my work clothes, the desk lamp throwing a small circle of yellow light across the surface of the desk and leaving everything else in shadow. Margaret's letter was in my jacket pocket. The bourbon from the night before was still untouched on the kitchen counter. I had walked past it 3 times and not wanted it. Some nights, clarity is more useful than comfort. The message from Frank read only, "Watch the second clip before you call me." I opened the file. The timestamp showed the previous Tuesday evening at 7:22, 40 minutes after Derek's clip had ended. The conference room again, the same camera angle. But this time Derek was not alone. Natalie was seated at the far end of the table, her jacket off a legal pad in front of her, covered in handwritten notes. She looked nothing like the polished, composed CFO I saw at board meetings and family dinners. Her hair was loose, one side tucked impatiently behind her ear. There were shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer had fully addressed. She looked like a woman who hadn't been sleeping well for a very long time. Derek was standing near the window arms, crossed the familiar ease in his posture that I had spent 42 years reading as confidence, and now understood was something else entirely. "Harmon says he needs 2 more documented observations before he'll commit to the assessment date," Derek said, his voice coming through the audio feed with striking clarity. "So I need you to start keeping a log. Every time you see Raymond do something that could be characterized as confused or forgetful, write it down. Date, time, what happened. Keep it on your personal device, not your work machine." Natalie looked up from the legal pad. "Derek, I've told you I don't feel comfortable. You've told me that 3 times now." Derek cut her off, and there was an edge in his voice that I hadn't heard before. Not loud, not angry, but final, the tone of a man who had run out of patience for a conversation he considered already settled. "And every time I've reminded you that comfortable stopped being an option, the moment you signed those Delaware documents. Your name is on those transfers, Natalie. Not mine." Her face went pale. Not gradually, immediately, the color draining out of her cheeks like water out of a glass. "You said that was temporary," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word in a way that made my chest contract painfully. "You said you'd restructure it before." "I said a lot of things." Derek turned away from the window and moved toward the door, picking up his briefcase from the chair beside it. "Keep the log. Send it to the secure email, not the regular one." He paused at the door and looked back at her, and I watched him arrange his expression into something that almost resembled concern. "Natalie, we are this close. Don't fall apart on me now." He left. Natalie sat at the conference table alone for a long moment after the door closed. She pressed both hands flat on the legal pad in front of her, and I could see from the camera angle that her fingers were shaking. Then she put her face in her hands, and her shoulders began to move in the broken, silent rhythm of someone crying so hard they've stopped making noise. My throat ached watching it. Not because I had forgotten what she was part of, I hadn't forgotten any of it, not for 1 second. But because I had raised a son and I knew what it looked like when someone realized too late that they had trusted the wrong person completely. I closed the laptop. For a long time I sat at the desk in the lamplight and turned the information over in my mind, examining it the way you examine something fragile that you're not sure how to carry. Derek had structured everything so that Natalie's name was on the paperwork. The Delaware Shell Company, her name. The fraudulent transfers, her signature. The consulting fee payments that constituted the core of the financial fraud routed through accounts she controlled. If this unraveled, Derek had built himself a clear path out. Natalie had done it. Natalie had signed it. Natalie bore the liability. And from the footage I had just watched, Natalie had only recently understood exactly how exposed she was. I picked up the phone and called Martin. "I need to tell you something about Natalie," I said when he answered. "I'm listening," he said. I described what I had seen in the footage. Martin listened without interrupting the way he always did when something important was being said. When I finished, there was a short pause. "That changes the calculus," Martin said carefully. "A frightened person with evidence is a very different variable than a willing co-conspirator. She's being set up to take the fall," I said. "Derek built her in as the exit strategy." "Yes." Martin's voice was measured. "Which means if she ever realizes that fully, and it sounds like she's getting there, she becomes either an asset or a liability, depending on which way she moves." A pause. "Raymond, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting you do anything about this right now, but I think we need to leave a door open." "What kind of door?" I asked. "The kind," Martin said quietly, "that someone can walk through when they've run out of other options." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Outside the study window, the River Oaks night was warm and still, the kind of Texas September evening that felt almost gentle after the brutal summer. I thought about Natalie's shaking hands on that legal pad. I thought about her shoulders moving in the dark of the empty conference room. And I thought about Margaret's letter in my jacket pocket, and the line that had stayed with me all day. "People who love you don't plan around your absence." Derek had planned around everyone's absence. Mine, Natalie's, his own conscience. The question now was whether Natalie would find the door Martin wanted to leave open, and whether she would walk through it before Derek decided she knew too much to be useful as anything other than a scapegoat. I didn't have the answer that night, but I kept the door unlocked. October arrived in Houston the way it always does, not with the dramatic leaf-turning of the northern states, but with a subtle softening of the air, a slight loosening of the heat's grip, as if the city had finally exhaled after 5 months of holding its breath. I had exactly 4 weeks left before my birthday, and I had decided to spend every one of those weeks lying through my teeth. "It starts today," I told Martin on the phone the morning of October 2nd. "I'm going to give Derek exactly what he's been waiting for." Martin was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "How far are you planning to take it?" "Far enough that he stops waiting and starts moving," I said. "I need him to accelerate. The more he does, the more the cameras catch." "Raymond." Martin's voice carried the particular weight of a man choosing his words carefully. "You understand that if you overdo this, if you appear genuinely impaired in front of witnesses, Derek could use that against you independently of Harmon's assessment." "I've been running a $45 million company for 40 years, I said. "I think I can manage the performance." A pause. Then, with the closest thing to dry humor Martin Ellsworth ever permitted himself, "Try not to enjoy it too much." The first performance was at breakfast the following Monday. Derek came by the house on his way into the office. He had been doing this more frequently in the past month, stopping in with coffee and questions wrapped in the warm packaging of filial concern. I was standing at the kitchen counter when he walked in, and I had already rehearsed what I was going to do. I poured the coffee into a glass of orange juice, not dramatically, not obviously, just the wrong container. like a man whose hand went somewhere familiar while his mind was somewhere else. Derek's eyes moved to the glass immediately. "Dad." His voice went carefully soft, the voice of a man performing worry. "That's you just put coffee in the OJ." I looked down at the glass with what I hoped was the correct mixture of mild confusion and embarrassment. "Did I?" I set the coffee pot down, shook my head slowly. "I don't know where my head is this morning." Derek set his own coffee on the counter and put a hand briefly on my shoulder. "Are you sleeping okay?" "You look tired." "I'm fine." I said the way old men say it, a little dismissive, a little proud, a little less convincing than they intend. Derek nodded slowly. His eyes stayed on my face a beat longer than necessary. That evening, Frank sent me a text. Camera in the lobby picked up Derek making a call in the parking structure at 6:15. He was on for 11 minutes. Based on the number he dialed, it was Harmon. I had been back in my office at 7:15 reading quarterly figures when I got that message. I set the phone down, picked up my pen, and went back to the numbers. Good. Over the following 3 weeks, I gave Derek what he needed. At a board meeting, I asked Robert Whitmore, our longest-serving board member, a man I had known for 25 years, to repeat a point he had just made, then apologized vaguely for losing my train of thought. Robert looked at me with a flicker of concern that told me the performance had landed. Derek, seated 2 chairs away, wrote something on his notepad immediately after. In the weekly executive meeting, I looked at a spreadsheet I had reviewed the night before and asked Natalie to walk me through the numbers again because I was having trouble following the columns. Natalie looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not the practiced concern Derek wore, but something rawer and more conflicted, something that lived behind her eyes and didn't make it all the way to her face. At home, I moved slowly through rooms. I left notes to myself in visible places. Grocery lists on the counter, reminders by the phone, the kind of paper trail that whispered this man is losing his grip. Every single evening, I sat in the study with the door closed and reviewed Frank's daily footage summaries. Derek was calling Harmon twice a week now. The calls were getting longer. In one clip, Derek was filmed at his desk writing notes. Frank's associate had managed a second camera installation in Derek's personal office during a weekend when the building was empty. Martin had confirmed it was covered under the same legal framework, Raymond's building. Raymond's lease, Raymond's right. And though the angle didn't capture the words, the speed and focus of the writing told its own story. A man building a case. On the 22nd of October, Frank called me at home. "There's a clip from this afternoon you need to see," he said. "Derek's office camera." I opened the file on my secure laptop. The footage showed Derek seated at his desk phone to his ear, leaning forward with his elbows on the surface, in a posture I recognized from 40 years of watching him concentrate. "The assessment is on track," Derek was saying, his voice sharp with suppressed excitement. "Harmon says he has more than enough. I'm thinking we move after the birthday, let the party give us one more round of witnesses, then file within the week." A pause. "Once we have the guardianship, the rest falls into place automatically. The trust restructure, the company control, all of it." Another pause, listening. Then he laughed short, satisfied, the laugh of a man counting money he hasn't touched yet. "Don't worry. He thinks everything is fine. He has absolutely no idea." I closed the laptop. My hands were perfectly steady on the keyboard. My breathing was controlled and even. But somewhere deep behind my sternum, something that had been holding on by sheer discipline for 8 months finally released, not into grief, not into rage, but into a cold, settling certainty. He has absolutely no idea. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the edge of Margaret's letter. "That's right, son," I said quietly to the empty room. "He has absolutely no idea." 1 week before my 70th birthday, Derek walked into my office with a document he had been building toward for 8 months. I just didn't let him know I knew that. It was a Tuesday morning, the 1st of November. The Texas sky outside my 12th floor windows had finally surrendered to autumn, pale gray clouds pushing in off the Gulf. The temperature outside cool enough that the building's heating system had clicked on for the first time since March. There was something almost peaceful about it. The kind of morning that made you want to sit with a second cup of coffee and let the city move without you for a while. I was at my desk reviewing vendor contracts when Derek appeared in the doorway with 2 cups from the executive kitchen and the particular smile he reserved for moments he had already decided were victories. "Got a minute?" he asked, setting 1 cup on my desk. "For my son always." I leaned back in my chair and gestured at the seat across from me. He sat down, set his own cup aside, and reached into his jacket to produce a slim document, 2 pages clean. White paper, precise professional formatting, the kind of thing that a corporate attorney puts together when they want something to look routine. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward me with 1 casual finger, the way a man slides over something he considers a formality. "I've been working on something," he said, his voice warm and easy. "A management transition proposal. Given the company's growth over the past 2 years and given—" He paused just long enough to let a shadow of concern cross his face. "Given that you've seemed a little stretched thin lately, I think it makes sense to formalize the authority structure. Put things properly on paper. Take some weight off your shoulders." I picked up the document and began to read. My face stayed neutral. My hands stayed perfectly still on the pages. But my pulse climbed with every paragraph, because what I was holding was not a management proposal. It was a full and irrevocable transfer of operational and financial authority to Derek Caldwell, effective upon my signature, with no sunset clause and no reversal provision without Derek's written countersignature. In plain language, the moment I signed this document, Derek could make every major financial decision for Caldwell Footwear Group without consulting me or the board. He could restructure accounts, approve expenditures of any size, override operational decisions, and direct the company's legal and financial advisors. And when this document was placed before a Texas court, alongside Dr. Harmon's guardianship petition, both signed, both dated, both showing that Raymond Caldwell had voluntarily handed authority to his son just days before being declared cognitively incapacitated, even my irrevocable trust would face a prolonged legal challenge that could tie up control of the company for a year or more. This was the one more signature from the footage. This was the final piece. I set the pages down and reached for my coffee, buying myself 3 slow seconds. Then I looked up at Derek with the mildly unfocused expression I had been carefully calibrating for 4 weeks, not vacant, not confused, just slightly less sharp than the man he remembered. Just enough. "It's thorough," I said. "You know me, I like to read things more than once before I put my name on anything. Legal language takes me longer than it used to." Derek leaned forward slightly, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw it. The flicker of impatience behind his eyes, a tension in his jaw that didn't belong on the face of a devoted son presenting a routine business document. He smoothed it away in under a heartbeat and replaced it with warmth so practiced it was almost convincing. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need." He tilted his head. "I just thought with your birthday coming up this weekend, getting this settled beforehand might give you some peace of mind. Let you actually enjoy the party for once instead of thinking about work." "That's thoughtful of you," I said. The exact same words I had used in March when he asked about my will for the first time. He didn't remember. Or he no longer cared whether I noticed the pattern. "So you'll look it over." He held my gaze a beat longer than felt natural. "I'll look it over," I said. "Give me a few days." He stood and picked up his coffee, buttoned his jacket, moved toward the door with the unhurried ease of a man who had already decided the outcome and was only waiting for the paperwork to catch up to his certainty. At the doorway, he paused and turned back, and for a brief, disorienting moment, his face did something I was not prepared for. The practiced warmth fell away, and what appeared underneath it just for a second, just long enough, was the face of the 7-year-old boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my car on the way home from Little League games. That face. That exact face. My chest cracked open so completely that I felt it behind my eyes. I kept my expression open and warm. "Happy early birthday, Dad," he said. "Thank you, son," I said. The door closed. I sat without moving for a long time, holding the document with both hands, staring at the blank line on the second page where my signature was supposed to go. Outside the windows, the Gulf clouds moved slowly across the Houston sky, heavy and gray, and indifferent to everything happening on the 12th floor. Then I folded the document along its center crease and placed it in my jacket pocket. On the opposite side from Margaret's letter. Two pieces of paper against my chest, her words telling me what had always mattered, and his document telling me exactly how far he was willing to go to take it. I picked up the phone and called Martin. "He made his move," I said. Martin exhaled a long, quiet breath that carried 20 years of professional restraint, and underneath it, the sound of a man who had hoped he was wrong and was not. "Bring it in this afternoon," he said. "We have work to do." 3 days before my 70th birthday, I sat down with Martin Ellsworth and Frank Donahue for what I knew would be our final meeting before everything either held together or came apart. The rain had moved in off the Gulf that morning and wasn't planning to leave. It came down steady and gray against the tower windows, turning the Houston skyline into something impressionistic, all light and blur and indistinct edges. Martin had cleared his entire afternoon. Frank arrived 7 minutes early, which for Frank meant he'd probably been in the building for an hour already, running through scenarios the way he always did before something significant. I hung my jacket on the back of a chair, sat down, and looked at both of them. "Tell me where we stand," I said. Martin opened the folder in front of him and went through each layer with the precise, unhurried manner of a man who had checked every number 3 times and was checking them a 4th time now for my benefit. "Asset protection is fully in place," he said, ticking points off with one finger against the table. "The irrevocable trust has been filed and recorded with Harris County. The dual-class share restructure is processed. Derek's CEO authority covers day-to-day operations, but the voting class shares that determine company direction board composition and any sale or dissolution of the company are locked in a structure that requires a 75% supermajority to alter. He does not have 75%. He cannot get it." Martin looked up at me over his glasses. "The life insurance beneficiary designations have been updated. The new will is sealed in this office. Derek's name does not appear as a primary beneficiary in any document anywhere." My shoulders dropped half an inch. "The management transition document he brought me Tuesday. Documented, photographed, and included in the referral package," Martin said. "Which brings me to the next point." He glanced at Frank. Frank leaned forward and folded his hands on the table. "Yesterday afternoon, Martin's office submitted a formal referral to the FBI field office here in Houston," he said. "Under what's called the crime fraud exception, which allows an attorney to break normal confidentiality when there is active ongoing criminal conduct that poses a direct threat to the client, Martin was able to provide the Bureau with a complete evidence package." "What was in it?" I asked, even though I already knew most of the answer. I needed to hear it said out loud in order, like a man checking a list before a long journey. Frank opened his legal pad. "Footage transcripts from the office cameras documenting Derek's conversations about the guardianship scheme and the plan to have you declared incapacitated. Financial records showing $3.1 million moved out of Caldwell Footwear Group through fraudulent consulting fees and the Delaware Shell Company. Documentation of the $80,000 payment to Dr. Harmon. The management transition document Derek attempted to have you execute last Tuesday. And..." Frank paused for exactly 1 beat, a full timeline narrative prepared by Martin, connecting all of it into a single criminal conspiracy. The word conspiracy landed in the room and sat there. "They've opened a preliminary inquiry," Frank continued. "In my experience with a package this complete, that inquiry moves to a full investigation within days, not weeks. The Bureau will likely want to observe before they act. Allow Derek to take the next step himself, give them cleaner grounds for arrest. He held my gaze. The birthday party is almost certainly their window. 40 guests, a public venue, a documented occasion. If Derek makes any move that night, says anything, does anything, that constitutes an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy, they will have everything they need. My jaw tightened. And if he doesn't move that night, then we are still in a position of complete legal protection, Martin said. Either way, Raymond, you win. The question is just the timeline. I nodded and sat with that for a moment. The rain continued its steady work against the windows. Natalie, I said. Martin and Frank exchanged the briefest glance. Then Martin spoke carefully. She is structurally exposed, he said. Her name on the Delaware registration, her signature on the transfer authorizations, Derek has positioned her as the person holding the bag if this unravels. His defense strategy almost certainly will be to characterize her as the architect of the financial fraud, and himself as a CEO who was misled by his own CFO. Martin paused. If she comes forward with corroborating evidence before Derek has the opportunity to establish that narrative, she has the ability to negotiate her own position with the prosecution. Cooperation agreement, reduced charges, potentially immunity depending on what she provides. And if she doesn't come forward, I asked, then she faces the same exposure as Derek, Frank said flatly. Her name is on the paperwork. That doesn't disappear. I thought about the footage. Her shaking hands. Her shoulders in the empty conference room after Derek walked out. The way her voice had broken on the words, you said, that was temporary. My personal cell is listed as an emergency contact for all senior executives in the company directory, I said. I'm not making a call. I'm not sending a message. But if she reaches out, we answer, Martin said. Immediately. And I have the paperwork ready to move within the hour if she does. Frank closed his legal pad. Then we're ready. The meeting ended at 4:32. I rode the elevator down alone and walked out into the Houston rain without opening my umbrella, tilting my face up for just a moment and letting the cold water hit my forehead and cheeks, washing away something I couldn't have named but had been carrying for a long time. 8 months. It had been 8 months since I opened a notebook in the study at River Oaks and started writing down dates and times and questions my son had asked me about what would happen to my money when I died. 3 days left. I got into the car and drove home through the wet, gleaming streets, and I was almost at the River Oaks gate when my phone buzzed against the leather of the passenger seat. I pulled to the curb under a live oak and picked it up. Unknown number. Texas area code. 6 words. I need to speak with you. The rain ticked softly against the roof of the car. I looked at those 6 words for a long moment, feeling something shift in my chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite sorrow, but lived somewhere between the two. Then I typed back Martin's office. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. The reply arrived in under 20 seconds. I'll be there. Thank you. I set the phone down on the seat and looked through the rain-blurred windshield at the oak trees lining the road, their branches dark and heavy with water. Natalie had found the door I left open, and now for the first time in 8 months, every piece was finally in place. I arrived at the coffee shop on Westheimer Road, 15 minutes early, and chose the corner table with my back to the wall, the same instinct Frank had shown me at the Brenham Street Diner 7 months ago. Some habits once learned don't leave. The place was a small, independent shop, the kind that Houston's midtown neighborhood still had a few of, tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax office with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the smell of dark roast so thick in the air you could almost chew it. Nobody here would recognize Raymond Caldwell. That was why I had chosen it. I ordered black coffee and watched the door. Natalie walked in at 7:58. I had seen Natalie Caldwell in boardrooms and at family dinners and at charity events for 9 years. I had watched her present quarterly financial reports with the composed authority of someone who had long ago stopped needing anyone's approval. She was by any measure a formidable woman. The person who walked through that door on a wet November morning was not the Natalie Caldwell I knew. She was wearing a dark coat over a plain gray sweater, no jewelry, her hair down and uncombed in a way that told me she had not slept. The shadows under her eyes were deep enough to see across the room. Her face, without the practiced confidence she wore at the office, looked younger and more frightened and somehow more real than anything I had seen from her in 9 years. She spotted me immediately and walked over without hesitating, sat down across from me, kept her coat on, put both hands flat on the table. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was steady, but I could see her jaw working the muscles tight with the effort of holding herself together. "I know you have no reason to trust me. Tell me why I should," I said. Not unkindly, but plainly. She took a breath. Then she reached into her coat and set a small black USB drive on the table between us. She didn't push it toward me. She just set it down and kept her eyes on mine. "Everything Derek planned is on that drive," she said. "Emails between Derek and Dr. Harmon going back 11 months, specific, detailed, explicit about the guardianship scheme and what it was designed to accomplish. Recorded phone conversations between Derek and the supplier he used." She paused and something moved across her face that was raw and ugly and honest. "Receipts for the substance that was put in your champagne." My chest seized. Not from surprise, I had known for weeks what was coming on Saturday night. From the simple, brutal weight of hearing it confirmed by someone who had been in the room. "How did you get all of this?" I asked. "Derek used my CFO credentials to access the procurement accounts," she said, and now her voice cracked slightly at the edges, though she pressed forward without stopping. "He told me it was for a consulting engagement. I signed off on a purchase authorization without reading the line items carefully enough. When I went back and looked," she stopped, pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright with tears she was refusing to shed. "The supplier is a chemical distributor in Louisiana that has no legitimate business relationship with a shoe company." She reached up and pressed 2 fingers hard against her mouth for a moment, composing herself by sheer force of will. Then she lowered her hand and kept going. "I confronted Derek 3 weeks ago," she said. "He told me that if I said anything, he would show the FBI my signature on the authorization and tell them I had planned the whole thing, that he had been trying to stop me." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, rough with a grief that had nowhere left to go. "He had a whole story ready. Emails he'd written to himself, time-stamped, framing me as the one who had approached the supplier. He had been building it for months." She looked down at her hands. "He built me a cage and handed me the key and told me it was a door." My throat ached so hard, it was difficult to keep my face neutral. I thought about every Sunday dinner at the River Oaks house, every Christmas, every family photograph on the wall of my office. My son had done this. My son had built a cage around this woman as casually as he built everything else, as a contingency, as an escape hatch, as a tool. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. Natalie lifted her eyes to mine and held them without flinching. "I want to tell the truth," she said. "All of it. To the FBI, to a prosecutor, to whoever needs to hear it. I am not asking you to forgive me for what I was part of." Her chin trembled for just a second before she steadied it. "I am asking you for the chance to make it right." My eyes burned. I blinked it back hard. "Push the drive across the table," I said. She pushed it. I picked it up and held it in my palm. Then I took out my phone and called Martin. "She's with me," I said when he answered. "We're coming in now." "I'll have the conference room ready," Martin said. I buttoned my jacket and looked down at Natalie. She was still sitting with her hands flat on the table, her coat still on, her eyes still holding that frightened, determined expression of a woman who had made an irreversible decision and was carrying it with everything she had. "Come on," I said. "Martin Ellsworth is the best attorney in Houston. Between what's on that drive and what we've already built, Derek is not going to be able to build his way out of this. Natalie stood on legs that weren't entirely steady, gripped the back of the chair for just a second, then let go. She walked out of the coffee shop ahead of me into the November rain, her shoulders square, her head up. She reminded me in that moment of Margaret, not in any feature or gesture, just in the particular quality of someone who had decided that being afraid was no longer a reason not to move forward. I followed her out into the rain, the USB drive in my pocket, alongside Margaret's letter, and I thought every piece is in place now. Saturday was 2 days away, and Derek had no idea that the woman he had built a cage around had just handed me the key. I arrived at my own birthday party carrying 3 things that none of my 40 guests could see. Margaret's letter folded in the left breast pocket of my dinner jacket, resting against my heart, the way it had every day for the past 3 months. The memory of Frank's voice from that morning, a 2-second call, nothing but, "We're in position, you're covered tonight," and the absolute bone-deep certainty that the man smiling and shaking hands across the ballroom had already lost, even if he didn't know it yet. The Post Oak Hotel's 42nd floor private ballroom was everything Derek had arranged it to be. Ivory tablecloths, crystal chandeliers throwing warm gold light across 70 years of white gardenias. Margaret's flower, a detail that had caught in my throat the first time I walked in, and that I had chosen not to examine too closely all evening. 40 guests, the right music, the right food, the kind of occasion that looked from the outside like a son honoring his father. Derek found me within 2 minutes of my arrival. "Dad." He took my arm, warmly steered me toward a group of guests near the bar. "You look great. How are you feeling?" 70 years old, I said. "How do you think I feel?" He laughed and pressed my shoulder and moved me through the room with the practiced ease of a man managing an event he had designed from the ground up. And that was exactly what he had done. Every element of this evening had been chosen for a reason. The venue public documented full of witnesses. The guest list board members, business partners, people whose testimony about Raymond Caldwell's condition on the night of his birthday party could later be useful in a courtroom. The champagne already selected, already prepared, already waiting for the right moment. I knew all of this. I had known it for weeks. What I had not known until 2 days ago was that Natalie had spent the 48 hours before this party making a very different kind of preparation. I spotted her across the room near the flower arrangements, speaking to a woman I didn't recognize. She was in a deep burgundy dress, her hair up, pearl earrings, the full armor of the Natalie Caldwell that Houston's business community knew. But when our eyes met across the ballroom, something passed between us that had no name in polite company. An acknowledgement. A reckoning. The particular look of 2 people who are about to walk into a fire together and have agreed without words not to flinch. She turned back to her conversation. Lily materialized at my elbow, 20 minutes in chocolate icing, already conquering the corner of her mouth, and Biscuit the rabbit tucked determinedly under one arm. "Opa!" She grabbed my sleeve. "The cake has 70 candles. I counted. Miss Carol said that's a lot of candles." "Miss Elena is correct," I said. "Are you going to blow them all out?" "I'm going to try," I said. She beamed up at me with the full radiance of a child who has no idea what the adults around her have been building for the past 8 months, and I crouched down and pressed my lips to the top of her head and held on for just a second longer than I needed to. She smelled like chocolate and strawberry shampoo and something impossibly clean that I could never adequately describe to another human being, the particular scent of a child who is completely safe and completely loved and completely unaware of how much work it took to keep the world from turning ugly around her. "I love you, Opa," she said, already squirming to get back to the cake. "I love you too, little bug," I said. "More than you know." She was gone in 3 seconds, darting back toward the dessert table. I straightened up and looked across the room to where Derek was standing, watching me with a glass in his hand and that wide, easy smile on his face. Natalie appeared at my side 30 minutes later. She was carrying 2 champagne flutes, moving through the guests with complete composure. And when she reached me, her expression was warm and social, and utterly unreadable to anyone who didn't know what I knew. Raymond. She held a flute toward me. Her voice was smooth, unhurried. Her fingers, I noticed, were perfectly steady. Derek wanted you to have this one. Said it's the good vintage. I took the glass, held it, looked at her. Her eyes met mine for exactly 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, she communicated more than most people manage in an hour. The apology she could never say out loud in this room. The confirmation that she had done what she told me she would do, had adjusted what she could adjust, had reduced what could be reduced, had left a margin that she prayed would be enough. And underneath all of that, something that looked like a woman who had made a terrible decision years ago and was spending tonight trying to begin paying for it. Thank you, Natalie, I said. She nodded and moved away into the crowd. I looked down at the champagne. The bubbles rose steadily through the pale gold liquid, catching the chandelier light, rising and dissolving and rising again. I thought about the Brenham Street diner, about Frank's gray eyes across a laminate table, about Margaret's handwriting on cream-colored paper, about a 7-year-old boy sorting shoeboxes on a Westheimer Road floor while his father worked the register. Then I brought the glass to my lips and took a single deliberate, very small sip, cold, dry, faintly wrong in a way that only someone paying close attention would notice. I set the glass down on the nearest table. 16 minutes later, the edges of the room began to soften. The chandelier light stretched and blurred. My pulse accelerated in the way I had been told to expect, not dramatically, not painfully, just undeniably. My hand found the back of a chair. From across the room, I heard Lily's voice rise above the music, sharp and high and frightened. Opa. And the last thing I saw before the gold light swallowed everything was Derek's face across the ballroom, his expression shifting from practiced concern into something faster and brighter and far more honest. He thought he had won. He had no idea he was already standing in the wreckage of everything he'd built. I came back to consciousness the way a man surfaces from deep water slowly in layers, with the weight of everything pressing down before the air finally reaches you. The first thing I registered was the smell, antiseptic and recycled air, the particular cold, clean scent of hospital rooms that no amount of money makes comfortable. The second thing was the sound of cardiac monitor's steady beep, unhurried, indifferent, keeping time the way only machines can. And the third thing, the thing that told me I was still in the fight, was pain. A dull, bone-deep ache behind my sternum, like something had been wrung out and left to dry. 70 years old, still breathing. That was enough. My eyes opened. The ceiling was white. The room was dim, lit only by the pale blue glow of monitoring equipment along the left wall and a thin bar of gray morning light pressing through the curtain gap. An IV line ran into my right forearm, taped flat and neat against my skin. I flexed my fingers. They responded. I moved my toes inside the hospital socks. They responded too. Good. I had trained myself over the past 3 months to assess before I reacted. Frank had drilled it into me across a dozen meetings in parking garages and corner diners, always the same instruction, always delivered in the same unhurried voice. Raymond, the moment you show them your hand, it's over. Feel everything. Show nothing. I felt everything. Through the half-open door, voices drifted in from the corridor, low and careful. The kind of conversation that knows it is in a hospital and still cannot quite keep itself quiet. Derek's voice came first. I recognized it the way you recognize weather, before it arrives a particular pressure in the air, a shift in temperature. The doctors say the tox screen will take until morning. If it comes back clean, we move forward. If it flags anything, Harmon handles the documentation. A pause. Then Natalie's voice, quieter, threaded through with something that didn't sound like a conspirator at all. It sounded like a woman standing barefoot at the edge of something she had never agreed to step off. Derek, he has a granddaughter in there. She watched him fall. She's 10. His voice was flat dismissive, the way you talk about a detail that doesn't change the math. She'll forget. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the sound of a marriage fracturing, not a clean break, but the slow, grinding separation of two things that had been pulling apart for years and had finally run out of road. My right hand moved beneath the pillow fingers, finding the phone Frank had told me to keep there. Always. For exactly this moment. The screen glowed 4 missed calls from Martin Ellsworth, 2 from Frank, 1 from a 202 area code I recognized as the FBI field office number Martin had arranged 3 weeks ago through back channels I had never asked too many questions about. I typed one message to Martin. 7 words, nothing more. I'm awake. The talk screen will flag. The reply came in 40 seconds, and I counted every one of them. Already called Torres, they move at 8. I set the phone face down on my chest and breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, slow and measured the way my doctor had taught me after my first cardiac episode 6 years ago. Outside, Derek was still talking, his voice dropping lower now, the consonants blurring into the hum of the corridor. I had stopped trying to catch the words. I had been hearing enough for 8 months, enough to fill a federal case file, enough to cost a man I had raised from nothing, everything he thought he was owed. At 7:52 a.m., the door to my room opened. I closed my eyes to a slit and let my breathing go slow and deliberate. The performance of a man still unconscious. A role I had spent 93 days perfecting across every breakfast table and boardroom interaction, and Sunday afternoon, Derek had visited with that careful, watchful smile of his. 2 sets of footsteps entered. Derek's Italian leather Oxfords. I knew the sound of them, measured and confident on tile. Then lighter steps hesitating at the threshold. Natalie. Keeping to the doorway like part of her was already backing out. Still out, Derek said. He moved closer to the bed. I felt, rather than saw him lean over me, and my stomach turned with a revulsion so cold and animal that I had to press every muscle in my body into stillness to keep it from showing on my face. The smell of his cologne, the same cedar and bergamot he had worn since his 30s, a birthday gift I had picked out for him myself, reached me, and something in my chest cracked along a seam I hadn't known was there. By the time he's coherent enough to talk, he said, "It'll be done." Derek. Natalie's voice came apart on the second syllable. Not dramatically, quietly, the way things break when they've been holding too long. I can't do this anymore. You already did it. I reduced the dose. Her words were shaking but deliberate, each one placed carefully, like she had rehearsed them in the dark. He is alive right now because of what I chose not to do. That was me. That was my decision. You did what I told you to do. No. And her voice, for just that one word, went completely still. I did what my conscience told me to do. And last night, I did something else. The room went taut. I kept my breathing steady, my fingers curled slowly, silently around the phone beneath the sheet. What did you do, Natalie? It wasn't a question. It was a man hearing a wall come down and already calculating the damage. I gave them everything. Her voice broke on the last word, cracked right open, and I heard her pull a ragged breath in through her teeth before she continued. Frank Donahue, Martin Ellsworth, a federal agent named Torres, bank records going back 14 months, the Delaware Shell Company, and every transfer routed through it, the emails between you and Dr. Harmon about the guardianship testimony, the purchase receipt for the compound you had put into your father's champagne. A beat. All of it, Derek. Every single piece. 4 seconds of silence. I counted them against my heartbeat. Then the corridor outside erupted. FBI Derek Caldwell, do not move. The door burst wide. Derek's shoes scraped backward across the tile with a sound like something tearing. Natalie let out a cry that was half sob and half gasp, a sound that came from somewhere below composure entirely. I opened my eyes. FBI Special Agent Carla Torres filled the doorway, dark jacket badge raised two agents flanking her left and right, with the practiced economy of people who have done this before and feel nothing performative about it. Derek stood at the foot of my bed, his face drained to the color of old paper, his jaw working soundlessly, his hands half raised at his sides. For the first time in 42 years of knowing my son, watching him take his first steps, drop, his first baseball drive, his first car off the lot, with that enormous grin, I saw him look genuinely lost. Not frightened. Lost. Like a man who had run a very long race towards something and arrived to find nothing there. "Derek Caldwell," Torres said, her voice flat and absolute as a closing door. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, bank fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." He turned to me. His eyes found mine across the length of the room, and whatever he had expected to see there, whatever confused, frail, unconscious version of his father he had rehearsed this moment against, I was not it. I held his gaze with everything I had. 70 years of early mornings and hard decisions, and a love I had never once made him earn, and I held his gaze, and I did not blink, and I did not look away. "Dad, don't," I said. My voice came out steady. 70 years steady. "Just don't, son." Torres moved. The handcuffs clicked, a small, precise sound quieter than I expected. Derek was walked out through the door without another word, and the sound of his footsteps diminishing down that long hospital corridor was the loneliest sound I have ever heard in my 70 years on this earth. Natalie had not moved from the doorway. Her mascara had run in two dark lines down her cheeks, her hands pressed flat against her collarbone like she was physically trying to hold herself together from the outside in. She looked at me with eyes so full of grief and exhaustion, and something that might generously be called relief, that my own throat tightened against every instruction I had given myself about staying composed. "He was going to let you die," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I couldn't let that happen." "I know that too, Natalie." Her face crumpled entirely, then not the pretty, restrained kind of crying that looks dignified from a distance, but the deep, ugly, honest kind that has nothing performed about it, the kind that comes from somewhere a person has been keeping sealed for a very long time. She pressed her fingers over her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and she let herself fall apart in that doorway. And I lay there, in that hospital bed, 70 years old. Wires on my chest, IV in my arm. The taste of something bitter still faint at the back of my throat. And I let her, because some things deserve to be felt all the way through. Because she had chosen the harder thing when it would have been so much easier not to. And because, in the end, that is the only currency that has ever meant anything to me. The federal courthouse on Rusk Street sits 4 blocks from the building where I signed my first commercial lease in 1989. I walked past that old building on the morning of Derek's hearing and did not stop to look at it, because some memories are better honored by moving forward than by standing still. Martin walked beside me up the courthouse steps, his briefcase in one hand, the collar of his overcoat turned up against the December chill. He was 65 years old and had been practicing estate and criminal law for 37 of those years, and he moved through the entrance of a federal courthouse the way I had once moved through a stockroom, like a man who understood exactly where everything was. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like a man who slept in a hospital bed for 3 days and is now about to watch his son face a federal judge," I said. Martin allowed himself a small, dry smile. "That's specific. I'm a specific person." The courtroom was large and quietly formal, dark wood paneling. Fluorescent light softened by high ceilings, rows of benches that filled steadily as the 9 o'clock hour approached. I took my seat in the 3rd row. Frank Donahue sat 2 seats to my right, his reading glasses on, reviewing a document he had already reviewed 100 times. On my left, Lily held my hand. Her school had given her an excused absence. She had asked to come, and I had not known how to tell her no. "Opa," she whispered, "is Dad going to jail?" I looked at her, those earnest, dark eyes that had inherited their shape from my late wife, Margaret, from a face I had loved for 31 years. My chest ached in a place that never fully heals. "The judge will decide that, sweetheart," I said. "That's why we're here. So the judge has everything they need." She considered this with the grave seriousness of a 10-year-old trying very hard to be grown. Then she tightened her fingers around mine and leaned her head against my arm, and I pressed my lips together and looked straight ahead so she wouldn't see my eyes go wet. Derek entered through a side door with his attorney at 9:04. He wore a gray suit, no tie, which his lawyer had probably advised as a softening detail, and he walked with his shoulders pulled back in the posture of a man determined not to let a room full of people see him diminished. He did not look at me. I watched him anyway. Judge Patricia Hargrove took the bench at 9:12, and the room settled into the particular charged quiet of federal proceedings. Martin had told me to expect the arraignment to take 40 minutes. It took 53. The charges, read aloud, were conspiracy to commit murder in the first-degree bank fraud, totaling $3.1 million. Obstruction of justice and criminal elder abuse under Texas Penal Code, Section 22.04. Derek's attorney entered a not guilty plea. Bail was denied on the grounds of flight risk and the severity of the charges. The preliminary trial date was set for February 17, 2026. When the deputy moved to escort Derek back through the side door, he finally turned and found my face in the third row. I don't know what he was looking for. Anger, maybe. Or the particular devastation that comes from a parent seeing their child destroyed. What he found instead was something quieter and more permanent, not rage, not grief exactly, but the expression of a man who had made peace with a truth he had resisted for a long time. He looked away first. The final proceedings took 3 weeks. Natalie Caldwell entered a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, providing testimony and documentary evidence that proved decisive. Dr. Philip Harmon surrendered his medical license and agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence on the bribery charge. The $3.1 million extracted from Caldwell Footwear Group through the Delaware Shell Company was recovered in full through asset seizure plus interest and returned to the company's operating accounts. On December 19th, Martin called me into his office on the 18th floor of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower. The December sun came through the glass wall in long, flat rectangles of winter light, and he set a document in front of me on the mahogany desk. "This is the final version of the trust disposition," he said. "Everything is exactly as you specified. You just need to sign." I looked at the document for a long moment. The Caldwell Family Charitable Trust. $45 million distributed as follows: 30% to the Raymond and Margaret Caldwell Employee Legacy Fund, providing retirement security to all current Caldwell Footwear employees. 40% to the Caldwell Scholarship Foundation, funding college education for first-generation students across Texas. 25% held in trust for Lily Caldwell, accessible upon her 25th birthday. 5% to Natalie Caldwell, in recognition of courage. Derek Caldwell, $1, per the original terms of the trust, unchanged. "You know," Martin said carefully, "no one would question you if you reconsidered." "Martin," given the circumstances, "Martin." I picked up the pen. "I built this company for 43 years. I know exactly what it's worth and exactly who it belongs to." I signed my name. Raymond A. Caldwell. The same signature I had put on my first lease in 1989 on my first line of credit on the deed to the River Oaks house on Margaret's hospital paperwork the night Lily was born. Steady, unhurried. Certain. Martin took the document, reviewed it once, and then set it down and looked at me with something in his expression that went past professional satisfaction. "She would have been proud of you," he said. My throat closed. I pressed my back teeth together and looked out at the Houston skyline, at the city I had spent 43 years inside of, building one store at a time, one handshake at a time, one decision at a time. Somewhere in the middle distance, the Galleria Mall's glass roof caught the December sun and threw it back at the sky. "I know," I said. 2 days before Christmas, I drove to the Bel Air Boulevard flagship store. The first one, the original. The one that started with a bell above the door and a floor sample of 6 shoe styles. I parked in the same spot I had parked in for 40 years, walked in through the front entrance, and stood in the middle of the showroom floor. The staff looked up. A few of them recognized me. One of the younger saleswomen, 23, 24. A first-generation college student from Galveston. I happened to know on a company tuition benefit, smiled so brightly across the store that I felt my chest loosen in a way it hadn't in months. "Mr. Caldwell, we didn't know you were coming in. I don't always announce myself," I said. "I just wanted to see it." I stood there for a while looking at the shelves, the lights, the customers moving between displays. 43 years of mornings. 43 years of inventory counts and payroll cycles and decisions made in the dark when no one else was awake. I thought of Margaret. I thought of her letter, 15 years folded in the dark, at the back of her wardrobe, waiting patiently for the moment I would need it most. I thought of Lily's hand gripping my arm at a birthday party on a hotel rooftop, 5 small fingers that had held on when everything else was letting go. I was 70 years old. I had almost been buried by the person I trusted most. And I was still standing in the store I had built with my hands, watching a young woman from Galveston help a customer find the right fit, knowing that the money I had set aside would send her to college debt-free. Some men leave behind buildings. Some leave behind names on walls. I had always hoped that what I left behind would be something you could actually walk into, something that kept moving after I was gone. I turned up my collar against the December air and walked back out to my car. "I think I got it right. I've told you everything now. Every mistake, every warning sign I dismissed, every moment I chose comfort over truth because the truth was too painful to hold. If there is one thing 70 years and a hospital bed have taught me, it is this: the people who want what you've built will smile the warmest and stay the closest. Trust is not given, it is earned slowly, the way a good shoe is broken in. And when something feels wrong in your gut, in that quiet place beneath the ribs where God speaks before your mind catches up, listen." I believe he was speaking to me long before I was ready to hear. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're lying unconscious at your own birthday party to ask the hard questions about the people sitting at your table. Don't let loyalty blind you to evidence. Don't confuse blood with character. Here is what I believe plainly: a man's legacy is not measured in dollars. It is measured in who shows up when the money is gone. Lily showed up. A 10-year-old girl with pigtails and a crayon card showed up. That tells you everything. These are the grandpa stories. No one warns you about the ones that don't end with rocking chairs and warm kitchens, but with courtrooms and hard decisions made alone at midnight. This is a family story about love twisted into something unrecognizable by greed. And if sharing this grandpa story and this family story means one person asks a harder question sooner, then every painful word was worth it. If something here stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone, or made you think differently about your own circle, leave a comment below. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this family story, share it. It might reach the person who needs it most. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. I'll be here telling the truth as honestly as I know how. And to everyone who listened all the way to the end, thank you. Genuinely. It means more to this old man than I can say. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not for you, there's no shame in stepping away and finding content that fits you better. What matters is that you choose what's good for your soul.